Okay, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode. This is Dunia's Chronicles, and as always, we just find a good and important topics that we sit down and have a conversation. And we believe that most of these topics, most of the things that we are discussing here will be more helpful in terms of educating and informing people. Well, last week we had an amazing episode with Andrew King, and we discussed about the future of climate change, global warming, especially when we're talking about net zero emissions. And we've discussed a lot of things. And if you haven't had an opportunity, or if this is your first time ever to just stop by and listen to us, just don't worry. Go to our YouTube channel, take a look at yourself, listen to what we've discussed, and I believe that you can have some good point. And if you have some questions, some suggestions, some ideas, do not hesitate. Just comment on the discussion section below, down there. This week, actually, I want us to have a good discussion about something important. We do understand that oftentimes that our global leaders come up with something that join countries together for them to discuss about big challenges in our world. For example, UN, they have different UN conferences, G8, G20, all of these conferences, they just way to combine all the global leaders to have a good discussion on a way things can be solved. It could be about climate change, it could be about war, it could be about anything. And this week I want us to discuss something that is going on, and I believe it's the conference is almost over right now, and there is a lot of things have been discussed in there, and this is none other but the COP. The conference it's a conference of parties, which is actually a supreme decision for making body based on the United Nations Framework Convention on a climate change. This conference was the first established in 1995, and its purpose actually was to address global climate change, evaluate progresses, and negotiate binding agreement. There are different themes actually. The first one is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to climate impacts, financing climate actions in developing nations, promoting sustainable development and technology transfer. There are so many things that we believe we can discuss in here. But the major significance of this conference, actually, it is a major agreement like a Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement originated at this conference that you have to understand. The person whom I'm having a discussion today actually is a friend of mine and my co-host, Aditya. How are you?
Very good, Simon. Thank you for having me.
You've been away for very long. How many? 2 weeks?
2 weeks, yeah.
You went to what was it? Was it a conference or a workshop?
It was a workshop discussing about physical climate change and organized by the Center of Excellence.
See, this is where things get complex when people start talking about climate change. Mm-hmm. Because there is a physical climate, there is a chemistry, I don't know. There's a lot of things we have to combine together.
Yes, I mean...
What made you go to physical climate issues?
Well, as you said, there are different aspects of the study on climate change. There's a physical aspect where we study about the physics of climate change. What's the physics of the Earth system that's taking place as a result of human-induced warming. Okay. There's chemistry, which you are more familiar with than I am. And then it's a truly... interdisciplinary subject because there's aspects of economics, finances, policy making.
A lot of things in there.
Yeah. And so I work on the physical aspect, but I'm, as most people are, I'm also interested in the interdisciplinary aspect of this field.
Okay. So tell us about the COP. It is COP29.
Yes, this is the 29th Conference of Parties. It is taking place this year in Azerbaijan. And each and every COP has one major focus that takes place in the decisions or discussions that take place in that year's COP.
And this one is in solidarity of a green world.
Yes, solidarity of green world, but it has also been labeled as a finance COP, discussing about climate finance, which is a growing point of discussion today.
I'm interested. Continue.
Yes. So as I said, like each COP has one central idea on which discussions take place. Years ago in COP29, it was the Paris Agreement, where signatory nations pledged limiting global warming to below 1.5 and 2 degrees. And every single COP since then has now focused on how we are going to achieve those targets. And this year, the focus is on how the climate finances are going to help us achieve those targets, and what are the responsibilities of developing nations and developed nations in terms of reaching those targets. The main central point of discussion in this year's COP has been that the developed nations need to ensure that the damages that have already taken place due to climate change and extreme weather in developing nations, that the developed nations then provide or pool up a fund to provide to the developing nations to account for those damages and the losses, and to also prepare the developing nations for losses that are going to take place in the future. Because developed nations have caused the brunt of emissions, carbon emissions that lead to global warming and climate change, and the developing nations are facing the biggest impacts in today's world. So there's an inequity in terms of the people who have caused the biggest impacts and the people who are facing the biggest impacts. And one of the major focuses in this year's COP in terms of finance was to agree upon what's the amount of the fund that needs to be pulled up for developing nations, and how exactly where the money is going to come from.
I'm interested.
Yeah.
Continue. So, if I understand you correctly, the main theme actually it is to discuss the balance between those who cause the most problems and those who are affected to the most of the problems.
Yes, indeed, because there is undoubtedly an inequity in who faces the impacts.
I mean, that is obvious, because if you take a look for the infrastructures, the development and everything, those who are still developing, still facing a lot.
Yes, absolutely.
Compared to those who have already developed. And one among the major aspects of climate, disasters, is actually the recovery process. US has been hit with a major storm in just past couple months, but I believe I believe that the recovery process is faster if you can compare to other countries, like say, for example, in Africa or in Asia or something like that. So there is a valid point that they have to discuss concerning this matter. But the question remains the same. And I believe they've developed some ideas in it, actually. How much is going to be raised, and where that money will come from.
Good point. And I completely second you on that this is a matter of climate justice. So it's a matter of global climate justice, that's a point of law, finance, a lot of things. And so the number which was agreed upon and which has been suggested by economists as a correct number is actually $1 trillion per year, which is about 1% of the global GDP for the next few years to prepare the developing nations for forthcoming damages, and also to account for the damages that have already taken place. Now, there are many delegates from developing nations that are unhappy with this number and believe that a number closer to 5 trillion is more realistic. But 1 trillion was agreed upon as a target because it's sustainable to achieve. It's just 1% of the global GDP. However, the final amount, which I believe took place yesterday, these discussions are still ongoing, but this was agreed upon, that which was promised was 250 billion, which is way below the 1 trillion, which was
way below.
And so this has caused a lot of, I think the Guardian article, which I'm looking at the moment, says that COP29, $250 billion climate finance offer from rich world is an insult, is what critics are saying. So it's a big discussion point at the moment. And there are many developing countries and delegates that are saying that this amount, $250 billion, will do nothing. It would not put us on a path to achieving 1.5. It will put us on a path to achieving something more like 3 degrees Celsius or more, which we already are on.
I think I understand exactly their point of view in here. You see, the story about developing nation, it is just like the story in one family, 2 brothers in one family actually. One who has already been developed. He went to the city, explored the beautiful, the luxury and everything, got a lot of money and everything, and now he comes back to the village, to his family, to talk to his brother, who's now in a quest to go on beyond, to explore more, just like his brother, so as he can explore about the beauty of this world, and all the luxury and the glamorous and everything that this world can offer. Now the brother comes back and says, no, you have to protect and preserve the way of our ancestors. You have to remain this one. You have to maintain the culture. You have to maintain the balance. You have to remain who you are. And doing so, I will offer you a certain amount of help for you to just be able to sustain life here life exactly the way it is and where you are. You see, and the brother be like, okay, let me see if what you want to offer me, it is actually enough from what I want. I have a family to feed. I have a wife who's looking up to me. I have kids and all the things and responsibility that I can looking at me. And what you're offering me is totally an insult to me. And I cannot take it. So I'd rather go and experience whatever it is that you have experienced. I want to go and pursue things. I want to go and have developing careers so I can have more money and everything. And it's just like the same thing. You have been developed, a lot of industry. You've produced. We are the consumers. And now you want us to keep the ways, to maintain the nature, to maintain the balance in each and everything. And then at the end of it, the amount of money that you're offering us with the population increased in here will not be able to do anything. And I think that's what the Guardian, the critics are trying to say about these things.
Yeah, and that's a good way of putting it in more relatable terms, absolutely. And clearly this frustration is justified. But there are even more finer details that are missing is where the money is going to come from. Who is going to pay for it? Is the money going to be taxed to the richest billionaires who have profited a lot from the carbon emissions? Is it going to be taxed on the biggest companies, oil companies, gas companies that continue to emit carbon and profit from carbon emissions? Where is exactly the money going to come from? Is it going to come from private investments or rich countries? And these are still undecided finer points. And the fact that we still haven't been able to reach that 1 trillion target, which some critics will say is probably not even good enough, but we still haven't been able to reach that number. But there are other finer details that need to be discussed and probably be left over for the next COP.
But that I think will be like an ongoing issue because I think in previous COP as well, it was the same thing.
Yes, I think in previous COP, the idea of a loss and damage fund was discussed, but it was still ongoing discussions. And
yet, even right now in this conference, they cannot reach to the final print.
Unfortunately, no. And these are hard. These types of policy making is, in my opinion, definitely a hard thing to do. And the fact that these discussions are happening is one positive thing, but they're not happening as fast as they should be.
It is because people feeling like there is an imbalance in terms of the situation that what we see in here. And for what I see, I think reaching net zero emissions in the future, it's going to be a challenge. And I think what I'm trying to think to make sense in here, it is many countries now, they have to reach to the point of agreeing now to develop more, climate change adaptation strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is an insatisfaction between two parties, between two stages, those who have already been developed and those who are developing. You can see developing countries right now, they have a massive projects going on.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of industries, a lot of financial projects that are going on in different countries,
Mm-hmm.
and the heavy industries actually, and in terms of pollution and everything, it is increasing.
Yeah.
And those actually from other, and you can see even the GDP in other different countries, it's kept on increasing actually over the past couple of years.
Absolutely.
And basically from the final, we don't have the final print of the conference yet, but basically from what so far we have in the agreement in anything, I'm not so sure at this point in lifetime that leaders in the developing countries are going to agree with the final print. I'm not so sure, because this is just my personal humble opinions in here.
Yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see what happens in that case. And in addition to that, one of the things which you said, and I would like to add to that, is that this is a point of argument from the developed nations as well, is that list of developed nations that owe the money to the developing nations, that list was created in the 90s.
Yeah.
And since then, many countries which were developing at that point have already reached a stage of very high GDP, like some of the petrostates,
Mm-hmm.
the Gulf states, that have been able to profit from the oil that they have been able to export to many countries. They have developed quite a lot since the 90s. Then there's also China, India, that are rapidly developing at the current in the past few years. And many of the developed nations argue that perhaps many of these nations should be added to that list to provide the funds for the currently developing nations and prepare them for the future.
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of the main things that are being discussed quite extensively at COP29. And I think this is important that these types of discussions continue, not just in COP, but they continue in different individual nations and their parliaments in terms of climate finance, and becomes central in terms of media attention. And we're going to see more outcomes over the next week in terms of what are the major decisions, what are the major positives and negatives that came out of COP this year, and what to look forward to for next year's COP, and what are the central decision making, and what are the central topics that will be discussed in next year's COP. Amidst all of this, there's also been the World Meteorological Organization that gave an update on the state of the climate report at COP29, and they showed that 2024 is on track to becoming the warmest year on record, following on from last year, which was the warmest year, 2023. So 2024 is all but certain to be the warmest year on record since the 1850s, when instrumental temperature records began. And this is most likely to be the first year we will be above that 1.5 degrees level of warming. Now, this does not mean that we have crossed our Paris Agreement pledge, but this brings us extremely close to that 1.5 degrees target of Paris Agreement.
What was the target?
So the way the Paris Agreement target is defined is we reach 1.5 when there's a long-term warming of 1.5 degrees breach. So that means over a course of 20 years or 30 years, when the prolonged average of temperatures in that 10, 20, 30 years is above 1.5 degrees, not one single year. So that when the long-term average is above 1.5, that means we have breached the Paris Agreement target. But 2024 is likely to be the first year that we breach 1.5, that we go over that 1.5 degree level. So it's one single year, but it's incredibly close to that target.
Interesting. What are other things that they've discussed in this conference, though we don't have the final imprint yet?
Yeah, we do not have the final imprint yet, and there's so much going on in terms, like I've been looking at social media posts, many delegates who have been working countless hours at COP in discussions in rooms, like discussing with each other on what the major points are. And we're going to start seeing more and more coming out next week, because Friday was the last day. It was a 2-week long conference and no breaks. They do discussions on Saturday and Sunday as well. So it's quite rigorous conference, and we'll find more outcomes over the next week. So I'll be keeping an eye out on The Guardian and other news media outlets that cover this conference.
Also, we can also take a look in their final applications.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be looking forward to that. Yeah.
In addition to that, I want to find another path. It's just the way that I like to do things. I really, really, really like to go off-road sometimes, explore things. Because I believe in one thing. When they provide policies, it comes with different conditions. Sometimes it can be for the purpose of helping, but there are other people who actually use the policies, developed policies. And a matter of fact, other people are also push certain kind of policies for the purpose of who they know for themselves what is actually the purpose. And from the last video from the last discussion we had with Andrew King and the comments that we had in it, I think it's worthy to explore more the narratives and the concepts concerning climate policies, both sides, white side and a dark side, the plain one and the hidden side of it. Because if one thing I understand, let me ask you this question. I've asked you off air, and I ask you in here right now. When did we start noticing the climate is changing?
Well, the first time these questions arose was in the early 20th century, so around 1930s, 1940s.
That's a beginning point of view that for a very long period of time, we knew actually what happened, what will happen, and what the future is going to look like.
Yes, I would agree on that. And I think we have had the knowledge on what climate change is and how the planet is warming has been out there in the scientific world, and not just in the scientific world, in the general world in terms of policymaking as well for a very long time. Certainly by the 1960s and 70s, it was solidified that the climate is warming. And by the 1990s and the early 2000s, it was solidified that humans were the major drivers of climate change. There are finer details that we don't agree on, but
there are other people who don't agree with that concept that humans are actually the final cause of the global warming. For example, there is the news that I read somewhere. I can't mention the article. The person asked the question was like, if we go back like over more than 2,000 years before existence of humans, people say that, okay, probably back in the times, the climate was not stable. It has never been stable and probably will never been stable. So the question is, I think the question that scientists trying to find out is, what makes the instability of climate? Is it what we're actually doing? Okay, there are two concepts in here. Pollutions, greenhouse gases come from both sides, natural world and what we actually do. We actually engineer some of the gases based on our different daily activities, industrial activities, transportation and everything. And there is the natural world. And the concept of a natural world, some people would argue that in nature there is always a balance. Yes, it does, concerning the pollution, and at the same time it's sucking out the carbon air of the atmosphere. It creates the carbon and take it off to the atmosphere to create the life cycle.
Absolutely.
because the largest reservoir of carbon dioxide is in the ocean, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So people and scientists say that, okay, let's say, for example, what's nature provide, probably human can cover that in less than a year. If we have maybe 2 events that cause largest carbon dioxide from a natural world, human can cover that in just a single day or 2 or 3 or 4 days in terms of tons of emissions that we're doing each and every single day. So there is always 2 sides in here, and I think it's worthy to explore more. I think it's worthy not to shut our ears and eyes on what people think and say, because this is my favorite quote: those who control printed pages control the thinking of ages. In here at Dunia's Chronicles, I want us to be an open-minded, to develop a good way of thinking based on the different information that we have. And what I say, not all informations are valid. As a scientist, it's our role to do research.
Absolutely.
We have questions, developing ways to find answers to these questions. There are some of the answers that might not be final. So as we develop some different hypotheses and find a way that we can answer these questions in different ways. And I think that it's more important that we consider this. We have a consideration actually with what other people are saying. In my language, there is the saying that say that in Swahili it says kila lisemwalo lipo na kama halipo basi langojea. That is in Swahili, which is translated to be everything that is said, it is existing, and if it's not, then it's on the way.
It's quite profound.
What are you thinking? What do you have in your mind? Because you're gonna go and dig deeper in. I want you to help us on something. Trying to find more information. If you can find the link between different COPs and everything, as we are on a journey to explore more narratives at the end, I think the best way to educate people it is actually to acknowledge what it exists.
Yes.
We have to understand, okay, there are these narratives in here, but what is the originality of the narrative? For example, people believe that the earth was flat.
Or some people actually still believe that.
I do understand that some people still believe that the earth is flat. Did you get a point? No, there is a narrative the earth is flat, and they have their own points why they believe the earth is flat. And they debunked most of scientists, most of anything like, okay, you guys say the earth is round, but no, it's not. They have the different ways on believing the way they believe, and they have a different education to do so. And I think if we, as a climate atmospheric scientists, because climate is just what happened along the way, we're atmospheric scientists. And our way actually is to study what's happening in our atmosphere. Climate changes is one of them. Climate extreme is another thing. And people are actually using these climate policies based on a different ways as they believe it fits so.
Right. I think, yeah, as you said, this 2 groups of people, one that strongly believe and one that don't. In terms of flat earth thing, I think it's very good that part of the population that does believe it is very small. And our growing technology and our understanding of the world that we live in, and the fact that we have been to space, that we can see that the earth is round, is justification enough to counteract whatever reasons that small population has. It's a declining population anyways. But climate denialism and people who deny climate change or that it's caused by humans, that population is also growing small and small. In decades ago, the population was much large, and that existed in even policymakers. It was a bipartisan issue. One side, in most parliaments around the world, one side thought that climate is changing, the other side thought that it isn't. And that's not the case anymore. Most policymakers would agree that the climate is changing. And a large number of policymakers would also agree that humans have played the biggest role. And now the question comes down to which policies, whether the current policy making is fast enough to counteract those changes. And are we unnecessarily delaying policies that help us reach those Paris Agreement targets? That's where the finer details lie. And the speed at which we achieve them is very important.
Oh, definitely. I do agree on that. And that's why I say the best way to educate a person is to acknowledge what they are saying and what they are believing. And as an educators, we have a role to play in this one to tell them, okay, this is what you believe. This is the food that you're eating. It tastes good. It is amazing. I agreed on that. But this food is poison. It has 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 kind of sense of chemicals that can cause A, B, and C's. Now, if you don't believe in this, let me take you back in time. This kind of chemical was used for this one. This kind of chemical was used for A, B, and C, and D. Now, if we use the certain kind of chemicals in the modern days, creating this kind of food that you're consuming, guess what you're gonna have? A, B, and C's, but we want to listen to you, what you're saying, and so forth. So as we can have a valid discussion. I say that's the best way to sit down and discuss with the critics.
Right.
But we have a lot of things that we need to explore, and others say we are going on a journey.
Yes.
And the good and the best journey that I think we can have, we need to go back in time. Because we cannot be in the future yet. So we need to travel back in time. So you travel back in time and find whatever it is that you can find out in terms of climate. And I believe that last time we have a discussion that we want to explore climate change. Climate in the past, right? And you're gonna find some things in there. We're gonna have a topic talking about climate change in the past.
Yeah.
How based on this kind of education, actually, how long does the data goes?
So, in terms of our instrumental record, it goes back to 1850. But then there's a large group of scientists that do what we call paleoclimate studies. And that some data sets go back 1 million years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. And some data goes back millions of years. These are proxy records, tree rings, ice cores from the glaciers in Antarctic and Arctic. And all these provide us these proxy data sets that give us a sense of what carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere were in the past and what the temperature in those times were.
So I think that's worthy to explore.
Absolutely.
If you can, we can create something out of it. We can have a good discussion on that topic about climate change in the past. Let us go back in time.
Yeah, as you said.
And based on their time, let us ask some valid questions to ask based on that particular time. If we have a data goes up to 1 million years, let us go about 500 years. In each 500 years, let us see how the climate was at the time. Does the people at the time believe that the climate was changing? That's just like a concept that we're having because they didn't know that we have. It's just like the feelings of the climate. What kind of disaster happened back in the days? What was the climate changes? Adaptation and mitigation strategies. I believe that it was in the ancient times, right? So I think it's worthy to go back in time because the best way to understand where we are and where we are going is we have to just hop in this time travel machine and go back in time, understand what happened. So as we can understand where we are and where we are going from here.
Yes, I agree. It's certainly worth putting present day climate change in the context of past climate change.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's overlooked by climate scientists, which a lot of people may think that climate scientists just don't overlook the fact that climate has been changing forever. But that's not the case. Scientists know that climate has been changing forever. And there's a large group of climate scientists that work very hard in trying to understand how present day climate change differs from climate changes of the past and put that into context for future climate change. the rate at which present day warming is taking place is unprecedented. It has never happened this fast at this rate anytime before. And because humans exist in this short time frame of such unprecedented rate of warming, the speed at which we are warming, there's a huge exposure of humans to the changes that are taking place. Our economies, our societies have not been developed to sustain or sustain this speed of or rate of climate change. We have developed for a world which is much cooler than what we headed for. And that is the reason why present day climate warming is nothing of what we have seen in the past.
And I think there is something that we have to understand, even the population as well. We have high disasters now, and we have the impact of disaster actually to destroy the lives of many people. It is higher nowadays because the population is even higher.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are quite a lot of indirect impacts that people don't think about when it comes to climate change. People think about hurricanes, storms, floods, droughts, but there are long-term impacts of even one single extreme event. Like there are studies which have shown that in the past few years, just 2 decades before this, the extreme weather events that have taken place have had a huge effect on the economies of major countries in inflation rates, economic impacts, indirect economic impacts in terms of food prices, because plants grow in a certain range of temperatures. If our planet goes outside that certain healthy range of temperatures,
definitely
certain plants will not be able to grow. Certain crops cannot sustain, cannot adapt that quickly.
And that's we're gonna have to miss a lot of organic foods, and then we have to rely on greenhouse agriculture.
Yeah, on greenhouse agriculture, or there's gonna be a huge shift in our diets, which
that's gonna be a problem.
Not a lot of people can adapt to that quickly.
Definitely.
And these are long-term changes that happen because of a handful of extreme weather events that are caused by climate change. There's water shortage that is taking place. Most of the fresh water, Earth is covered 70% by water, but only 3% is fresh water.
Oh boy.
And only 1% of that is drinking water, which is available largely underground as groundwater. But there's a huge overpumping of groundwater in the past few years and deforestation that have largely depleted most of our freshwater sources. But climate change adds on to that, because when you have more drought, our soil becomes dry. And the groundwater underneath, the storage, the efficiency of storing that groundwater reduces. Groundwater recovers when you have rainfall, but extreme rainfall runs off the surface. It doesn't seep in to the ground. So when you have extreme rain, it's unusable. You can't use that to replenish groundwater.
I think, Aditya, there's something people don't understand here. When we're talking about climate extremes, people feel like, as you said, it's a typhoon, hurricanes, biggest tornadoes like the one that did from the movies, blisters, and something like that. So, but people don't understand is actually, we're still going to have these certain weather conditions, but they're going to become very extreme than the way that we can bear. For example, it's going to be temperature. We're going to have some humidity, rainfall, wind speed. See, but when you're talking about extremes, it's going to be extremely hot, extremely humid, because last year China hit 100% of a humidity. Have you watched those videos? If you haven't, you've seen it caused a lot of problems in China, most of the cities in China. You could see water dripped from the ceiling actually, and electric appliances actually. A lot of people get electrocuted from that. It was the hot and humid. People have to walk around in the house with umbrellas actually. See, now, extreme rainfall now we're having that now. There are so many countries that are suffering from extreme rainfall. Picture this. other countries, they really like to preserve the cultural way of living. For example, if you come to Africa, we have a modern cities and everything, but there is a traditional aspect of it. People living in the jungle like to do everything organic in terms of even the houses they build house out of a mud and using tree leaves to cover the roof of everything. But extreme rainfall destroys so many habitations, actually so many natural habitations from these countries. See, now people build their own kind of bridges that use local woods. Extreme rainfall flush it away.
Right.
Did you get a point?
Yeah.
So when we are talking about climate extremes and when we are saying about climate is changing, people thinking about major events, those are called events. So we have to differentiate these things in here. For example, we can have, let's say, what if one day average of temperature, let's say for example it's 45, but if it goes for more than 3 days consecutively, that becomes an event.
Yes, a heat wave event.
A heat wave event. Now that we have a categorization, people have to understand to split between climate extreme events and climate extremes. Or extreme weather events, that we can call them, or extreme events, something like that. And it's the same thing actually. I remember, was it 3 years ago when I was in Taiwan, professor was just talking about climate change, and he says people actually they've noticed something. They have kind of fruits in Taiwan that are highly growing during winter season. That during winter season they have a plentiful of a harvest from these fruits. But they have discovered now the impact of climate change. Actually, the long-term days of winter, the winter days actually started being reduced. They are going shorter and shorter. Now they are afraid maybe in upcoming 30 to 50 years from now, that kind of a fruit will have to be reproduced actually from the unnatural environment.
Right.
And while most people like to keep the organic, am I making sense in here?
Yeah.
And that is what we want to talk. So the concept of climate change, it is actually really, it's happening.
Yes.
And we are experiencing it, whether we agreed on it or whether we don't agree. Last week from the video actually, there is the guy comment and he says the climate has been changing since before you were born. It was changed, it's still changing, and probably it will never be stable.
The person's not wrong, but
he's actually right.
Yeah, he's right, but you have to put the rate of change and the kind of change into context. And
that's where we are saying, if for example we're saying, okay, this food is hot and this food is hotter,
right?
We're talking about rates different in here. Yeah, it was rainfall last year, but this year it's not the same.
No, and there are tangible effects, like people can see it. They're increasing food prices because certain commodities just cannot be produced at the same way that they could before. Wheat, rice, cocoa in parts of Africa. It's going to affect your day-to-day lives. It's going to look and another thing which people overlook, a huge impact is going to be in the insurance sector. Because in the future, when we talk about extreme weather events, if they become more common, it will cause insurance companies to cut back on some of the insurances that they provide. Because it's just going to be too expensive for them to stay.
Definitely. Maybe some of them, they have to be out of the business.
Yeah. And that would also mean that certain commodities just won't be available because sellers would not have confidence in selling them without insurances. So it's going to have a huge impact on daily lives of people. It already has in present day, and the question is how much of it can be avoided going into the future.
And with what I see from our global leaders actually discussing with the new policies and the disagreement between the new policies, I think I'm confident enough to say that we still have a long way to go.
Indeed, we do have a long way to go.
Because, the first and the most important thing I think we can achieve as the one species of humanity is to have one goal and agreed all of us upon that goal. They say I'm a Christian. In the Bible, there's the concept that's and there's a concept back in the days when people they have the same language, agreed on one thing, they become unstoppable. So if it reached to the point that as a humanity on this matter concerning climate change, I'm going to be sure in here, concerning climate change, it is actually when we reach to the point and we agreed. Because right now there is a disagreement and people feel like there is not a fair, there's no fairness in policies, most of the policies that are actually available. People actually put policies, these developed countries put policies and developing countries disagreed on them right now. And right now, most of these developing countries right now, they've reached the point of, I think they say it, they're fed up. And if you've been reading news and listening, you would understand the pattern now. Even the confidence within themselves that they want to fight for their own future has been increasing.
Right. Yes, and it's not just the developing countries. I think a large proportion of the younger population is going to be exposed to
that one, Gen Z.
Yeah, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. But they're the ones who are going to face the biggest issues if the climate continues to warm. And there's a sense of frustration and from the inaction.
Definitely.
That's happening. I think, in my opinions, I don't think there's inaction. I think that there is climate action. I think it's just slower than what we expect or what the pace at which it should be.
I can say it's good in theory, but less in practice.
I would probably agree on that.
Because in theory and papers, we are doing a good job. Very passionate when we're talking about climate change. Very passionate when you use pictures from third world countries and trying to be passionate to help these people getting off their knees and go on with their lives. Very passionate when we are talking about these issues. But when it comes to put our words into actions, our policies into actions, that's the problem comes along the way. It's slower when we have to act. So it's going to be, COP29, they've discussed about this one, but this is not a new thing. They've discussed in a previous COP and the previous before that about the climate's financing and everything, and they discuss. For example, I think it was the previous two ones, they've discussed about the largest forest on this planet, the Amazon.
Yes. And
they wanted to put funding support to pay the government because that forest actually covers more than 8 countries surrounding that forest. And if we put that into perspective, most countries complained about it. It is not sufficient enough. And guess what? Thousands of hectares that have been lost from the forest. So prior from the meetings.
That's very interesting. And it's a good segue to the fact that next year's COP is going to be in Brazil.
And I'm pretty sure they are going to discuss again about financial issues, and they are still not going to be agreed on that one as well.
Well,
I don't know. This is just my humble opinion.
Yeah. And only time will tell. Hopefully these dialogues don't just stay on paper. There are strong agreements that take place in the future, and this can lead to something going on field action, actual action that takes place.
For example, let us discuss about one thing. So we're almost out of time, but let us discuss about this one thing. The carbon tax.
Yes.
For example, okay, carbon emission. Okay, countries have to reduce their carbon emissions and so and so. But they've posed something again. Okay, let us create carbon tax based on how much you produced. You have to pay.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How about industries in developing countries? People believe that that kind of policy, actually, it is a strategy to block the industries in developing countries. But if we agree that we want to reduce carbon dioxide from the large industries, let us have to start discuss actually from the major source of it, which is the energy.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, carbon tax.
Yeah, true. As you said, like, be it developed or developing countries, the largest amount of carbon emissions comes from a handful of big companies in the world. And the idea of establishing a carbon economy and carbon tax makes a lot of sense. I think we are headed in that direction, but again, it's the finer details, like how much carbon tax, how do you set up such an economy, who is paid the carbon tax, like who gets paid the carbon tax, who gets the credits if someone does a good job in offsetting carbon emissions. Does it even make sense offsetting carbon emissions?
I don't know if it does make sense, because countries, large industries that have big wealthy, those who are very wealthy, they can afford paying that one, which means they can afford produce even more.
Yeah, and admittedly, it's hard to say how effective it's going to be and how exactly it's going to be implemented. And I'm not an expert on it, so I'm more curious.
We need to find an economist, actually. We need to talk about carbon taxes.
Yeah, someone who works in this sector. It would be great to have a conversation.
We can find somebody in there. Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you have found one or two things that can be interesting, or that might be excited, or they might excite you. But as we've said, there's a lot of things that we have to consider. A lot are there concerning the policies and the actions, and based on both sides of the world, those who have already developed and those who are developing. I believe there is a lot that we can learn, and we have to agree that there are so many controversies that goes on, and each and everything has two sides. As I usually say, then I am saying it again. Those who controls the printed pages controls the thinking of ages. You're listening to Simon and Aditya. This is Dunia's Chronicles. Until next time, you have a beautiful and fantastic weekend. Bye-bye.